Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're kind of shifting gears.
We are.
If you've been with us, we've already waded through CeMAP 1, all the heavy regulation, and then CeMAP 2 with the technical stuff. But today
is different.
today is where the rubber actually meets the road. We are tackling CeMAP 3.
Yeah, the final hurdle. And honestly, this is the one that really trips people up. The ones who think memorization is enough.
Right.
You can't just flashcard your way through this one.
That's exactly what stood out to me in the source material you brought in, this masterclass analysis of a residential case study. It feels like the whole game changes here.
It does.
It's not about, it stops being a memory test like reciting what a repayment vehicle is, and it starts feeling more like you're a detective.
Yeah.
You have to actually solve a puzzle.
That is a perfect way to frame it.
Right.
The earlier exams, you could get by with rote learning. You memorize the rules, you memorize the product specs, you tick the box. CeMAP 3 is fundamentally different. It is all about application. It's about taking all those, scattered facts and building a coherent, defensible recommendation for a real person.
So you aren't just identifying a mortgage, you're justifying a life decision.
Exactly.
And today we're diving deep into a standard residential case study. This is the bread and butter of the exam, isn't it?
It is. But before we even open the file on our clients, I need to flag something crucial from the source material. It mentions that CeMAP 3 is built around linked questions.
Right, I saw that phrase, 10 linked questions. For someone who hasn't sat the exam yet, what does that actually mean? Because normally in multiple choice, if I get question 1 wrong, I can still get question 2 right.
Exactly, but here, the stakes are so much higher on your initial analysis. It's a domino effect. If you misinterpret the client's needs in the very first step in the fact find, you risk carrying that error through the next 9 answers.
Whoa. So if I decide in question 1 that they're risk takers, but they're actually risk averse, I'm basically answering the wrong exam for the rest of the paper.
Precisely. You could fail an entire case study just because you missed one tiny nuance in the introduction. You're building a house on a cracked foundation.
That is actually pretty stressful.
Yeah.
But valuable to know. So the mission today is to slow down and learn how to read that fact find so we don't trip over the first wire.
We are going to deconstruct a scenario, spot the traps, and explain why the answer that looks cheaper is very often the one that fails you.
I'm ready. But, before we crack this case, just a quick thought for everyone listening. This deep dive is actually part of a full CeMAP 3 playlist we're putting together. It covers the whole approach.
And listening to the whole series will really give you the best outcome.
It will, yeah, because the logic just builds on itself. So if these study aids are helping you, please subscribe, like, and comment. Tell us which CeMAP topics you want us to look at next, or, just tell us where you're tuned in from. It really does support the channel and helps us reach more learners.
Oh, for sure. That community aspect is huge when you're just staring at textbooks all day.
All right, let's open the file. Who are we dealing with today?
So the source material gives us a classic profile. We have a married couple.
Okay.
They're both employed, PYE.
Just to clarify for anyone new to this, payee, pay as you earn. So they're standard employees, taxes taken at source.
Correct, which implies a stable income structure. We're not dealing with complex self-employment, dividends, all of that. It simplifies things.
Good.
They're looking to purchase a residential property, and they have a 15% deposit ready to go.
Okay, 15% deposit. So where does that put them on the risk scale?
It puts them in a moderate position. They're not high risk like a 5% deposit buyer, but they're not super safe like someone with a 40% deposit either.
Got it.
They have some skin in the game, but they're still borrowing 85% of the property's value. That's a significant loan to value, or LTV.
Okay. What else do we know?
They also have 2 dependents. That is a key detail.
2 kids.
Minimal unsecured debt, so no huge credit card bills hanging over them. And critically, they plan to remain in this property for at least 5 years.
So we have a family, stable jobs, decent deposit, staying put for a while. On the surface, this sounds kind of easy, like a standard high street mortgage application.
And that is where people get complacent. You have to listen for this specific constraint. The source material highlights one sentence in the fact find that basically overrides everything else.
Which is?
The clients explicitly express concern about potential future interest rate rises.
Ah, okay. So they aren't just looking for a house. They're looking for peace of mind.
That's the anchor. If you ignore that sentence, you will fail the case study. That one sentence dictates the entire strategy.
Before we get to the strategy, then, let's break this down using that structured analysis method the source talks about. We can't just jump to picking a product yet, right?
No, that's just guessing. We need to build a profile.
Yeah.
Step 1. The objective. Based on that one sentence, that fear of rate rises, what is their primary objective?
Stability. They want to know exactly what the bill is going to be every single month. No surprises.
Correct. Payment stability is the priority. Okay, step 2, the timeline. They said at least 5 years. So we have a medium-term horizon. This is crucial for things like introductory periods and early repayment charges, which we'll get to.
And step 3, risk profile. Now, this is where it gets a bit tricky. They have stable jobs, which suggests they could take a risk, low debt, same thing, but they have 2 kids and that 15% deposit.
Exactly. Let's think about the dependents. Having 2 children means their disposable income, the money left over, spoken for. Kids are expensive.
For sure.
If their mortgage payment suddenly shot up by, say, £300 a month, could they absorb that?
Maybe, but maybe not. And with kids, you generally don't want to be testing that theory.
Right. So even though their income is stable, their expenditure is sensitive.
Yeah.
They can't necessarily absorb a sudden shock.
There's something else interesting in the source notes here, this idea of the unsaid. It points out there's no mention of moving soon, no retirement, no income volatility. Why is the absence of information so important?
Because in CeMAP 3, you cannot invent facts. This is a hard and fast rule.
Okay.
If the text doesn't say, we expect a bonus next year, you cannot assume they have extra cash coming. If it doesn't say, we want to move to Spain in 2 years, you must assume they're staying put. You have to work strictly within the 4 corners of the text.
I can see how that trips people up. You might project your own life onto them. You see a young couple and think, oh, they'll probably move or have another kid.
And that assumption would cost you marks. Stick to the script.
Okay, so we have a risk-averse couple who wants stability for at least 5 years. Now, let's look at the menu. The case study usually presents 4 options, right?
Typically, yes. In this scenario, the source lists 4 contenders: a 2-year tracker, a 5-year fixed rate, a discounted variable rate, and an interest-only structure.
All right, I'm going to play the role of the unwary student here. I look at that 2-year tracker and I see it has the lowest initial rate. Let's say it's 3.5%, while the fixed is 4.5%. It's cheaper. Why wouldn't I just pick that one?
And that is the classic attraction trap.
Yeah.
You're looking at the price tag, not the mechanics. A tracker mortgage tracks the Bank of England base rate. It moves.
Yeah, it goes up and down.
Yes. So if the Bank of England raises rates to fight inflation, your mortgage rate goes up immediately.
But it's cheaper now.
It is cheaper now. But remember that one sentence we flagged at the start: concern about future interest rate rises. If you recommend a tracker to a client who just told you they're afraid of rate rises, you are giving them exactly what they fear. You are exposing them to volatility.
It's like selling a convertible to someone who explicitly said they're terrified of getting sunburned just because the convertible is on sale.
That's a great analogy. It doesn't matter if it's cheaper today. It fails the suitability test because it contradicts their primary objective. You're selling them a problem, not a solution.
Okay, point taken. So what about the discounted variable rate? That sounds good, a nice discount. But does variable mean the same danger?
It's actually slightly worse in terms of their control. With a tracker, you're tracking the Bank of England. With a discounted variable, the underlying rate is set by the lender.
The lender themselves.
Yes, so they have some discretion.
So the lender could just wake up on a Tuesday and decide to hike rates.
Within reason, yes. It introduces uncertainty. For a couple with 2 kids and a tight budget who prioritize stability, recommending any product with variable in the title is a fail. It ignores the risk profile we established.
Okay, third option then, interest only. That would definitely have the lowest monthly payment of all of them. Surely that helps their budget.
It lowers the monthly outgoing, yes.
Yeah.
But let's look at the structure. An interest-only mortgage doesn't pay off the debt. It just services the interest.
So at the end of the term...
At the end of the 25-year term, you still owe the full amount you borrowed.
And looking back at the fact find, I don't see any mention of how they'd pay that back.
Exactly. There is no repayment vehicle mentioned, no investment plan, no second property to sell, no inheritance, nothing.
So if I put them on interest only, 25 years from now, they're homeless.
Unless they find a massive lump sum, yes. Recommending interest only to a family with dependents and no repayment strategy is incredibly dangerous advice. It aligns with low cost, sure, but it completely fails on long-term security. It's a ticking time bomb.
So we've eliminated the tracker because of volatility. We've eliminated the discounted variable for the same reason. We've eliminated interest only because of the repayment risks.
Which leaves
the 5-year fixed rate.
Yeah.
The winner by elimination.
Correct.
But I want to push back on this a little. The rate is higher than the tracker, Are we really serving the client by making them pay more every month?
Yes, because you need to reframe what that extra cost is for. They're just paying for interest. They're paying a premium for insurance.
Insurance against the rate rising.
Exactly. Let's walk through why this aligns. First, the timeline. They plan to stay for 5 years. The rate is fixed for 5 years. That's a perfect match.
Okay, 1 for 1.
They're locked in for the duration of their intended stay. Second, it neutralizes their specific fear. They're worried about rates rising. This product guarantees their rate won't rise no matter what the economy does.
And third?
Budgeting. With two dependents, knowing exactly what comes out of the bank account every month down to the penny allows them to plan. They can budget for school, for holidays, for emergencies, without worrying about some announcement from the Bank of England.
And since it's a repayment mortgage, assuming we've paired the fixed rate with a capital repayment structure, they're actually chipping away at the debt every month.
Correct. They're building equity, it's safe, it's predictable, and it solves the client's problem.
This brings us to a phrase in the notes that I underlined twice. CeMAP 3 tests alignment, not attraction.
That is the golden rule. Attraction is about what looks good on a billboard, low rates, cash back, free valuation. Alignment is about whether the product fits the client's life.
Right.
In the exam, you have to ignore the shiny objects and look for the alignment.
So how does this actually play out when you're sitting there in the exam room staring at a multiple choice question? The source mentions a question elimination strategy.
This is a vital tactic because the exam writers are clever. They will put the attraction answer as option A.
Of course they will. They want you to click the shiny thing.
So when you read a question, don't just look for the right answer. Start by crossing out the wrong ones based on the fact find.
Okay, give me an example. How does that look in practice?
Okay, let's say question 3 asks, which product feature is most unsuitable for these clients? One of the options will be early repayment charges. Now, a lot of students might pick that because, nobody likes paying charges. It sounds like a bad thing.
Right. My gut says charges are bad.
But look at the fact find. These clients are staying for 5 years. They aren't moving. They aren't redeeming the mortgage early. So early repayment charges aren't actually a problem for them. They'll never trigger them.
I see. So even though it's a negative feature, it's irrelevant to this client.
Correct. However, if another option is interest rate volatility, you pick that immediately. Why? Because that is the specific thing that harms this client. You have to filter the answers through their profile, not through general opinion.
And this touches on the internal consistency we mentioned at the start. You can't say in question 1 they need stability, and then answer question 4 saying a tracker is best because it's cheap.
Precisely. The exam logic will punish you for that.
Yep.
If you decide in question 1 that this is a risk-averse client, every single answer after that has to treat them as risk-averse. You can't flip-flop.
It's like building a legal case.
Exactly. You can't change your story halfway through the trial.
That's a really helpful way to visualize it. And speaking of legal cases, we should probably touch on the regulatory aspect. The source asks, would this recommendation withstand regulatory scrutiny?
The FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority standards, this is the bedrock of the whole qualification.
They talk about avoiding foreseeable harm. That sounds heavy. What does that actually mean here?
It means you can't plead ignorance. If you put a client who is terrified of rate rises onto a variable rate mortgage, and then rates go up, causing them financial distress, well, that was foreseeable harm.
Because the risk was obvious.
It was obvious, and you knew their fear. You exposed them to it anyway. That is bad advice.
Yeah.
Potentially even mis-selling.
Whereas the 5-year fix?
It avoids that harm completely. It's defensible. If a compliance officer looked at your file 5 years later, you could say, I recommended this because it guaranteed their payments in line with their stated objective. That's a bulletproof file.
Now, the source material throws a curveball at the end. It asks us to imagine a twist.
Yes. The what-if scenario. This is designed to test if you're really thinking or if you're just applying a template.
So the twist is, what if everything was the same? Same income, same kids, same fear of rates, but the couple mentioned they plan to relocate for work in 2 years.
Well, that changes everything. Suddenly, our perfect 5-year fixed mortgage becomes a trap.
Why? They still want stability.
Because of the early repayment charges, the ERCs. Fixed-rate mortgages usually come with penalties if you break them early. If you sign a 5-year deal, the lender expects you to stay for 5 years.
Right.
If the clients need to sell and move in year 2, but they're locked into a 5-year deal, they could face thousands of pounds in penalties.
Then we're talking like 3%, 4% of the loan amount?
Easily. On a £200,000 mortgage, that could be £8,000 just to exit the deal.
Wow.
That destroys any benefit of the fixed rate.
So even though they still fear rate rises, the timeline kills the deal.
Exactly. The timeline becomes the dominant constraint. In that variation, you might have to look at a 2-year fixed rate.
Which aligns with the move.
Or maybe even a tracker with no ERCs.
But wait, you said the tracker was bad because of the volatility?
It is. But facing a guaranteed £8,000 penalty might be worse than the risk of a rate rise. You have to weigh the lesser of two evils. This just shows you can't memorize families get fixed rates. You have to look at the specific combination of variables.
It's dynamic. It feels like this is the first time in the whole qualification where you're actually being treated like a professional advisor, not just a student.
That is exactly the point. CeMAP 1 was the rule book. CeMAP 2 was the product manual. CeMAP 3 is the job.
The job. I like that. Okay, so to recap what we've unpacked today, because we've covered a lot of ground, what's the formula for success here?
It starts with a rigorous breakdown of the fact find.
Right.
You look for that golden sentence that defines their objective.
Right. In this case, the fear of rate rises. Then we move to structured analysis.
Define the objective stability. The timeline, 5 years. The risk moderate.
And then we play the elimination game. We don't just pick the winner. We actively disqualify the losers.
Yep. Kill the tracker for volatility. Kill interest only for repayment risk.
And finally, we check our work against the FCA standard. Is it defensible? Does it avoid harm?
And you ensure you stick to that same story across all 10 linked questions. No changing lanes halfway through.
It's discipline over creativity. You know, it's funny, when you lay it out like that, it actually makes the exam feel less intimidating. It's not about knowing everything. It's about having a process.
It is entirely about process. If you trust the framework, the answers usually reveal themselves. The examiners aren't trying to trick you with magic. They're testing if you can spot the obvious logical flaws.
Before we wrap up, is there one final thought you want to leave our listeners with? Something for them to chew on?
There is, actually. We talked about that conflict between cheapest and safest. In the real world and in the exam, clients will often tell you two contradictory things. They'll say, I want the lowest possible monthly payment, and I want to sleep soundly at night knowing my rate won't change. The classic dilemma. I want a Ferrari for the price of a Ford. Right. And here's the question for you to mull over. If those two desires contradict each other, which one takes precedence in your exam answer?
Ooh, that's a good one. If I have to disappoint the client on one front, which one do I choose?
Hint. It's usually the one that protects against harm. In the hierarchy of needs, safety almost always trumps savings in the eyes of the regulator. You can justify a slightly more expensive product if it offers safety. You can't justify a dangerous product just because it was cheap.
That's a great perspective shift. It's not just about math, it's about protection.
Exactly.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Hopefully, this case study walkthrough helped you see the logic behind the exam questions.
It's all about the logic.
And again, just to remind you, if this breakdown helped you, please subscribe and check out that full CeMAP 3 playlist we mentioned. It covers the entire approach from start to finish. Drop a comment. Let us know where you are in your study journey. Are you just starting CeMAP 3, or is the exam tomorrow? Or just tell us where you're tuned in from. We'd love to know. It supports the channel and helps us reach more learners like you.
Good luck with the studies.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.